The sky above Korthar had turned a muted lavender, marred by swirling clouds of dust that clung stubbornly to the atmosphere like the last breath of a dying creature. Once, the plains had been lush, rolling in vibrant greens and shimmering silvers unique to the Rhelathan ecosystem. Now they lay cracked and desolate, their vastness stretching out into a bleak, endless horizon. The sun's light barely broke through the thick haze, painting the land in a melancholic twilight. Beneath the dying surface, deep within a sterile underground laboratory, Dr. Ilan Morak squinted at the holographic display flickering before him. His mind raced as he analyzed the latest soil samples. The nutrient readings were grim, confirming what he had feared since arriving 2 months earlier. The planet's soil was more than just exhausted, it was on the verge of death. Even the hardiest native plant species had begun to wither. Soon, nothing would grow at all. Ilan leaned back, letting out a slow breath. Korthar's environmental collapse was accelerating, and with it, the extinction of the Rhelathans, a once thriving species, whose technological advancements had once awed human scientists like himself. Now, their cities lay half abandoned, the few remaining citizens clinging to life through rationing and sheer determination. When the United Earth Coalition had sent out a call for volunteers to assist the Rhelathans, Ilan had been the first to sign up, drawn by both scientific curiosity and a deep empathy for a civilization on the brink. The soft hiss of the lab door sliding open caught his attention. Heavy footsteps followed, echoing through the cold chamber. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The weight of leadership hung thick in the air before Vector even spoke. "Any progress?" asked the deep, gravelly voice of the Rhelathan leader. Ilan sighed, finally pulling his eyes from the data and turning to face Vector. Towering over him, the Rhelathan leader was an imposing figure. His teal skin shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in slow waves, reflecting the tension and exhaustion that had plagued him for months. Ilan could see the toll of their crisis etched into Vector's features. His once proud shoulders now carried the weight of an entire species' survival. "I'm working on it," Ilan replied, running a hand through his tangled hair. "But it's not looking good. The soil's completely drained. Even the most basic nutrients have vanished. Honestly, I'm not sure how anything is still clinging to life out there." Vector's gaze dropped to the floor, his almond-shaped eyes darkening with frustration. His bioluminescent glow dimmed slightly. "We have tried everything within our knowledge. Our technology, our science. It has all failed us." Ilan stood, rubbing his temples. The sleepless nights, the pressure to find a solution, the dread gnawing at him each day, it was all becoming a crushing burden. He felt a deep responsibility, not just as a scientist but as a human being who had promised to help. And yet, after weeks of work, the planet was still dying. "Maybe," Ilan said quietly, thinking aloud, "we're thinking too small. Maybe it's not just the soil that's the problem." Vector tilted his head, the glow on his skin brightening with curiosity. "What do you mean?" "The problem isn't just the soil," Ilan explained, pacing the room as his thoughts accelerated. "The planet itself is in decline. For centuries, it's been running down like an engine losing fuel. Your ecosystem is collapsing because it can't renew itself. We're treating the symptoms, not the disease. If we want to save Korthar, we need to think bigger." Vector's expression hardened, though his eyes gleamed with a glimmer of interest. "And what do you propose, human? We abandon our home?" No, Ilan quickly shook his head. "I'm saying we have to re-engineer the planet. If we can't fix it as it is, we change the equation. We reshape it." "Reshape it?" Vector's eyes narrowed, but his curiosity remained. His bioluminescence flickered softly. Ilan moved toward the storage cabinet, pulling out a small vial filled with tiny synthetic seeds, a prototype he'd been working on since he arrived. He held it up for Vector to see. "These are bioengineered seeds. I developed them using earth plants as a base, but I've spliced in Rhelathan genetics, making them more resilient to the conditions on Korthar. They could revitalize the soil, bring life back to this world." Vector studied the vial in silence, his skepticism clear. "And you believe this will work? That Earth's plants, even altered ones, can survive where our strongest flora has failed?" "I'm not sure," Ilan admitted, "but we're running out of time. This could work. These seeds might create a foundation for a new ecosystem, one that can support your people again." The weight of his words hung between them, heavy with unspoken desperation. Vector turned away, his eyes drifting to the small window overlooking the barren landscape of Korthar. The remnants of what must have once been a vibrant, thriving world lay in tatters. Cracked earth. Dead forests. a sky heavy with dust. After what felt like an eternity, Vector spoke, his voice low, thick with resignation. "Very well, human. We will try your seeds." Ilan had always imagined planting seeds to be a peaceful, almost meditative process, but here on Korthar it felt more like a military operation. The Korthar plains, once covered in dense, otherworldly forests, were now a wasteland. Jagged rocks littered the ground, and the skeletal remains of alien flora created a haunting scene. The wind howled constantly, carrying with it the acrid taste of dust and decay. It made it difficult to speak, to hear anything beyond the storm of the planet itself. Around him, dozens of Rhelathan workers moved with mechanical precision, overseen by Vector and several other officials. They worked with speed and discipline, guided by Ilan's meticulous instructions on how the bioengineered seeds needed to be planted at precise steps in carefully selected areas where the soil still clung to some trace of viability. Hovering near his shoulder, a small drone hummed softly as it scanned the ground, calculating the best spots for planting. Here Ilan called, pointing toward a patch of soil. Two Rhelathans approached, their long, delicate fingers handling the seeds as though they might shatter. Standing nearby, Vector watched closely, his bioluminescence pulsing in slow, steady waves. He was anxious Ilan could see it in his rigid posture, in the barely concealed frown on his face. "You're sure this will work?" Vector asked, his voice a growl of doubt. It was the third time he had asked since the planting began. "I'm sure it can work," Ilan replied, kneeling to examine the soil again. "But it's going to take time. The seeds are designed to take root quickly, but it'll still be days before we see any real growth." "Time is something we have little of," Vector grunted, folding his arms as he cast a wary glance toward the horizon. The rationing of their food supplies had grown more severe in recent weeks, and reports of widespread malnutrition and illness were becoming harder to ignore. The elderly and children were already suffering the most. There was no room for error. "If this doesn't work," Vector let the words hang unfinished. "It will work," Ilan interrupted, more to reassure himself than the Rhelathan leader. He had to believe it. The months of research, the countless failures, they had to mean something. It couldn't all end here, with the last chance for Korthar being a wasted effort. As the last seeds were planted, Ilan dusted off his hands and stood. "Now we wait." Vector nodded but remained silent. Together they watched the Rhelathan workers finish their tasks, moving slowly and methodically. Every movement was deliberate, careful. There was no room for mistakes, not when so much was at stake. The wind howled again, swirling the dust into thick clouds that blurred the horizon. Ilan wrapped his scarf tighter around his neck and looked up at the sky. The twin suns of Korthar were beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting a dull glow over the desolate plains. "Let's head back to the base," Ilan said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "There's nothing more we can do here right now." Vector hesitated, his bioluminescent markings dimming as he considered something. "I will have guards posted here overnight, to make sure nothing disturbs the planting." Ilan raised an eyebrow. "You're expecting trouble?" Vector's skin pulsed with an eerie flicker of light. "There are factions among my people who do not believe in your methods. They see your efforts to alter our ecosystem with Earth-based biology as an abandonment of our heritage, of our identity. They may try to sabotage this." The revelation hit Ilan like a cold wave. He hadn't fully realized how divided the Rhelathans were on the issue. That's insane. If you don't fix the ecosystem, there won't be any heritage left to protect. "You don't need to convince me," Vector said, his voice dark with resignation. "But some would rather see us die as Rhelathans than live with what they perceive as foreign contamination." Ilan shook his head in disbelief. "I thought your people were supposed to be advanced." "Desperation breeds irrationality," Vector replied. His eyes gleamed faintly with sorrow. "It is the same with all species, I suspect." The days passed slowly, each one filled with mounting tension and uncertainty. Ilan spent every waking moment analyzing soil data, monitoring the progress of the seeds, and adjusting nutrient levels where needed. He was obsessive, barely allowing himself to eat or rest, knowing that every moment counted. The seeds needed time, but time was the one thing Korthar seemed to be running out of. On the third morning, Ilan stood outside the lab, staring at the expanse of barren land where the seeds had been planted. His drone hovered nearby, scanning for any signs of growth. Suddenly, a sharp beep from the drone caught his attention. His heart skipped a beat as he adjusted the display on his wrist monitor. The data coming in made his breath hitch. There, just below the surface, tiny roots were beginning to form. His pulse quickened. The seeds were germinating. It was working. Without wasting a second, Ilan sprinted toward the command center. He burst through the doors, where Vector stood, reviewing reports. "We've got growth," Ilan said, breathless, his face lighting up with excitement. "The seeds are sprouting." Vector turned, his eyes widening in surprise. "Already?" Ilan nodded, unable to suppress his grin. "It's just the start, but the roots are taking hold. We might actually pull this off." For the first time since they had met, Vector allowed himself a smile, however faint. "Perhaps I underestimated you, Ilan Morak." But their celebration was short-lived. As the twin suns dipped below the horizon that evening, a deafening explosion rocked the compound. Ilan was thrown from his chair, crashing to the floor as alarms blared throughout the base. Scrambling to his feet, his heart pounded in his chest. "What now?" Sabotage, Vector's voice crackled over the comm system, his rage barely contained. "They've attacked the planting site." Ilan's stomach dropped. His legs moved before his mind could catch up, and he sprinted toward the exit, throwing open the doors. In the distance, a column of thick black smoke rose from the exact location where the seeds had been planted. He ran harder, his lungs burning as he reached the edge of the planting site. The once meticulously tended ground was now a charred crater. Drones lay in pieces, their delicate components sparking faintly in the wreckage. Several Rhelathan workers were already there, pulling debris from the smoking ground. Medical teams tended to the injured, while others worked to assess the damage. Ilan collapsed to his knees at the edge of the crater, sifting through the soil with trembling hands. It was still warm, charred beyond recognition. The seeds, they were gone, destroyed, vaporized in the blast. "No, no, no, no," he muttered under his breath, panic surging in his chest. All of it gone. Weeks of work, endless nights, months of hope wiped out in seconds. It felt like a crushing, physical blow. They hit the heart of the planting, Vector growled, standing behind him. His bioluminescence flared with fury, the glowing patterns on his skin swirling wildly. The saboteurs knew exactly what they were doing. Ilan wiped a shaking hand across his face, the weight of helplessness pressing down on him. "They didn't just sabotage the planting site," he whispered bitterly. "They sabotaged our future." Vector's dark eyes burned with rage as he clenched his fists. "We will find who did this, human. And when we do, they will answer for their crimes." "I hope so," Ilan muttered, rising slowly. He forced himself to breathe, to focus. This wasn't the time to give up. But right now we need to figure out our next move. Did we lose all the seeds? "Not all," Vector replied, though his tone remained grim. "Some are stored at the secondary facility under heavier guard. But the ones here are lost." "Then we move to the secondary facility," Ilan said, his voice hardening with determination. "We'll plant the remaining seeds immediately. We can't afford to waste any more time." Vector gave a curt nod. "Agreed. I'll arrange for transport. But we must proceed with caution. The saboteurs may strike again." As they turned to leave, a group of soldiers rushed toward them, a tall Rhelathan at the head, his face marked with a deep scar. "Leader Vector, we've captured one of the saboteurs." Ilan's heart jumped. "Where?" "They were attempting to escape toward the mountains after the explosion," the soldier replied. "We intercepted them before they could reach the caverns." "Bring them to the holding area," Vector ordered, his voice cold and sharp. "I will interrogate them myself." The holding area was a small, dimly lit room deep within the compound, its walls cool to the touch. Ilan stood against the back wall, arms crossed, as Vector entered the room. In the center, shackled to a chair, sat the saboteur, a slender Rhelathan with jagged features and dark, glittering eyes. His bioluminescent markings were faint, flickering weakly, a sign of malnutrition and exhaustion. "Why," Vector demanded, his voice low and cutting. "Why would you sabotage the last hope for our people?" The prisoner lifted his chin defiantly, his eyes narrowing as he cast a glance at Ilan. "We do not need their tainted help," he spat. "The humans bring death. They will destroy us just as surely as this dying planet." Ilan felt his anger rise, but he bit his tongue, letting Vector handle the interrogation. Tainted help. Vector's bioluminescence flared slightly, the glow around him intensifying. Our people are starving, dying, and you would see them perish because of your hatred for outsiders. The prisoners sneered. Better to die as true Rhelathans than live as abominations. Unable to hold back any longer, Ilan stepped forward. What's the point of preserving your purity if there's no one left to preserve it? Do you really think your way of life matters if your entire species is extinct? The prisoner's eyes flicked to Ilan, filled with contempt. You do not understand, human. This is about more than survival. It is about identity. We are Rhelathans. We cannot be remade in your image. You're not being remade, Ilan snapped. We're giving your planet a chance to recover. Without help, there won't be a future, not for you, not for anyone. Vector raised a hand, signaling for Ilan to step back. You speak of heritage, of purity, but what heritage will we have if our children starve before they can even understand what it means to be Rhelathan? You are not defending our way of life. You are condemning it. The prisoner fell silent, his gaze dropping to the floor. After a moment, Vector stepped closer, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the prisoner. Are there more of you? More attacks planned. The prisoner's bioluminescence flickered again, but he remained silent. Vector's eyes narrowed, but he kept his composure. Take him away, he ordered the guards, and double the patrols around the planting sites. We can't afford to lose more ground. As the prisoner was dragged from the room, Ilan turned to Vector, his face etched with concern. There could be more of them. If they try another attack. They won't succeed, Vector interrupted, his voice steely. We will not let them destroy us from within. Ilan wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. The Rhelathans were a proud people, and pride, when mixed with desperation, could be a dangerous thing. We need to move fast, Ilan said after a beat. We can't afford any more delays. The secondary planting needs to happen now. Vector nodded. Agreed. We'll begin preparations immediately. In the cold depths of the secondary facility, Ilan stared at the last batch of bioengineered seeds. There were far fewer than he would have liked, but it was all they had left. This was it. Their last shot. Surrounding them, the facility buzzed with activity. Soldiers guarded every entrance, their armor glinting faintly under the dim lights. The facility itself had been fortified to withstand almost any attack, but the anxiety in the air was palpable. These seeds are stronger than the last batch, Ilan explained to Vector, who stood beside him, his glowing markings faint in the sterile light. I've made adjustments. They should be able to take root faster, given the right conditions. Vector remained silent for a moment, then nodded. And you believe this will work? Ilan hesitated. He wanted to say yes, to offer unwavering confidence, but the weight of everything they had lost was pressing down on him. It has to. Without another word, Vector signaled the workers to begin. As the Rhelathan workers moved to the planting zones, Ilan closely monitored every step of the process. There could be no mistakes this time. The seeds were placed with precision, the soil carefully examined for any weaknesses. For the first time in weeks, the wind had calmed, leaving the air still and quiet. The sky, though still a muted lavender, was clearer than usual, and the absence of the dust storms felt like a small blessing. Hours passed, and the planting continued. Ilan barely noticed the passage of time, consumed by the work, by the fear that lingered in the back of his mind. When the last seed was planted, he stepped back, exhaling slowly. His body ached from the tension, but a tiny spark of hope flickered within him. We did it, he whispered. Vector stood beside him, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he nodded. Now we wait. The waiting was excruciating. Days passed in a haze of anxiety. Ilan monitored the soil, watching the growth patterns with an obsessive focus. He barely slept, his mind haunted by the endless possibilities of failure. What if the seeds didn't take root? What if the saboteurs struck again? What if the planet itself rejected their efforts? Vector visited the site regularly, but he remained silent during most of the visits, his presence a reminder of the stakes they faced. Every time he appeared, the weight of his gaze felt like a physical pressure on Ilan's chest. But on the fourth morning, something changed. In the dim light of the laboratory, Ilan stared at his monitor, his heart racing as the data from the soil samples poured in. The readings were undeniable. Roots, tiny, delicate roots pushing through the soil. It was working. He barely had time to think before he grabbed his comm device, contacting Vector immediately. "They're growing," Ilan said, his voice filled with awe. "It's happening." Within hours, Ilan and Vector stood at the planting site, staring at the fragile green shoots that had broken through the surface. They were small, translucent, but alive. For a long moment, neither man spoke, the weight of what they were witnessing too great to interrupt. "We've done it," Ilan whispered, hardly believing his own words. "It's working." Vector's bioluminescence flared brightly, a sign of his overwhelming relief. "You have given us a future, Ilan Morak. You have given us hope." But even as they stood there, watching the fragile new life push through the soil, Ilan knew their fight wasn't over. The road ahead was still filled with challenges. But for now there was life, there was hope. And that was enough.